At first, his own people did not know Gwyndor, who went out young and strong and returned now seeming as one of the aged among mortal men because of his torments and his labors. But Finduilas, daughter of Orodreth, the king, knew him and welcomed him, for she had loved him before the Nianaeth, and so greatly did Gwyndor love her beauty that he named her Faelivrin, which is the gleam of the sun on the pools of Ivrin. For Gwyndor's sake, Túrin was admitted with him into Nargothrond, and he dwelt there in honor. But when Gwyndor would tell his name, Túrin checked him, saying, "I am Agarvain, the son of Umarth, which is the bloodstained, son of ill fate, a hunter in the woods," and the elves of Nargothrond questioned him no more. In the time that followed, Túrin grew high in favor with Orodreth, and well nigh all hearts were turned to him in Nargothrond. For he was young, and only now reached his full manhood, and he was in truth the son of Morwen Eledwen to look upon, dark-haired and pale-skinned, with grey eyes, and his face more beautiful than any other among mortal men in the elder days. His speech and bearing were that of the ancient kingdom of Doriath, and even among the elves he might be taken for one from the great houses of the Noldor. Therefore many called him Adanedel, the Elfman. The sword Anglachel was forged anew for him by cunning smiths of Nargothrond, and though ever black its edges shone with pale fire, and he named it Gurthang, iron of death. So great was his prowess and skill in warfare in the confines of the guarded plain that he himself became known as Mormegil, the Black Sword, and the elves said, "The Mormegil cannot be slain save by mischance or an evil arrow from afar." Therefore they gave him dwarf mail to guard him, and in a grim mood he found also in the armories a dwarf mask all gilded, and he put it on before battle, and his enemies fled before his face. Then the heart of Finduilas was turned from Gwyndor, and against her will, her love was given to Túrin. But Túrin did not perceive what had befallen. And being torn in heart, Finduilas became sorrowful, and she grew wan and silent. But Gwyndor sat in dark thought, and on a time he spoke to Finduilas, saying, "Daughter of the house of Finafin, let no grief lie between us, for though Morgoth has laid my life in ruin, you still I love. Go whither love leads you, yet beware.
It is not fitting that the elder children of Ilúvatar should wed with the younger, nor is it wise, for they are brief and soon pass, to leave us in widowhood while the world lasts. Neither will fate suffer it, unless it be once or twice only, for some high cause of doom that we do not perceive. But this man is not bidden. A doom indeed lies on him, as seeing eyes may well read in him, but a dark doom. Enter not into it, and if you will, your love shall betray you to bitterness and death. For hearken to me, though he be indeed a Gadwain, son of Umarth, his right name is Túrin, son of Húrin, whom Morgoth holds in Angband, and whose kin he has cursed. Doubt not the power of Morgoth Bauglir. Is it not written in me?
Then Finduilas sat long in thought, but at the last she said only, Túrin, son of Húrin, loves me not, nor will. Now, when Túrin learned from Finduilas of what had passed, he was wrathful, and he said to Gwyndor,
In love I hold you for rescue and safekeeping, but now you have done ill to me, friend, to betray my right name, and call my doom upon me, from which I would lie hid.
But Gwyndor answered,
The doom lies in yourself, not in your name.
When it became known to Orodreth that the Mormegil was in truth the son of Húrin Thalion, he gave him great honor, and Túrin became mighty among the people of Nargothrond. But he had no liking for their manner of warfare, of ambush and stealth and secret arrow, and he yearned for brave strokes and battle in the open, and his counsels weighed with the king, ever the longer the more. In those days, the elves of Nargothrond forsook their secrecy and went openly to battle, and great store of weapons were made, and by the counsel of Túrin, the Noldor built a mighty bridge over the Narog from the doors of Felagund, for the swifter passage of their arms. Then the servants of Angband were driven out of all the land between Narog and Sirion eastward, and westward to the Nenning and the desolate Falas. And though Gwyndor spoke ever against Túrin in the council of the king, holding it an ill policy, he fell into dishonor, and none heeded him, for his strength was small, and he was no longer forward in arms. Thus Nargothrond was revealed to the wrath and hatred of Morgoth. But still, at Túrin's prayer, his true name was not spoken, and though the fame of his deeds came into Doriath and to the ears of Thingol, rumour spoke only of the black sword of Nargothrond. In that time of respite and hope, when because of the deeds of the Mormegil, the power of Morgoth was stemmed west of Sirion, Morwen fled at last from Dorlomin with Nienor, her daughter, and adventured the long journey to Thingol's halls. There new grief awaited her, for she found Túrin gone, and to Doriath had come no tidings since the dragon helm had vanished from the lands west of Sirion. But Morwen remained in Doriath with Nienor as guest of Thingol and Melian, and were treated with honor. Now it came to pass, when 495 years had passed since the rising of the moon, in the spring of the year there came to Nargothrond 2 elves named Gelmir and Arminas. They were of Angrot's people, but since the Dagor Bragolak they dwelt in the south with Círdan, the shipwright. From their far journeys they brought tidings of a great mustering of orcs and evil creatures under the eaves of Ered Wethrin and in the pass of Sirion. And they told also that Ormo had come to Círdan, giving warning that great peril drew nigh to Nargothrond. Hear the words of the Lord of Waters, said they to the king. Thus he spoke to Círdan the shipwright.
The evil of the north has defiled the springs of Sirion, and my power withdraws from the fingers of the flowing waters. But a worse thing is yet to come forth. Say therefore to the Lord of Nargothrond, shut the doors of the fortress and go not abroad. Cast the stones of your pride into the loud river, that the creeping evil may not find the gate.
Orodreth was troubled by the dark words of the messengers, but Túrin would by no means hearken to these counsels, and least of all would he suffer the great bridge to be cast down, for he was become proud and stern, and would order all things as he wished. Soon afterwards, Handir, lord of Brethiel, was slain, for the orcs invaded his land, and Handir gave them battle. But the men of Brethiel were worsted and driven back into their woods. And in the autumn of the year, biding his hour, Morgoth loosed upon the people of Narok the great host that he had long prepared. And Glaurung, the Uruloki, passed over Anfauglith, and came thence into the north vales of Sirion, and there did great evil. Under the shadows of Ered Wethrin he defiled the Aethel Ivrin, and thence he passed into the realm of Nargothrond, and burned the Talath Dirnen, the guarded plain between Narok and Teiglin. Then the warriors of Nargothrond went forth, and tall and terrible on that day looked Túrin, and the heart of the host was upheld as he rode on the right hand of Orodreth. But greater far was the host of Morgoth than any scouts had told, and none but Túrin, defended by his dwarf mask, could withstand the approach of Glaurung, and the elves were driven back and pressed by the orcs into the field of Tumalad, between Ginglith and Narok, and there they were penned. On that day all the pride and host of Nargothrond withered away, and Orodreth was slain in the forefront of the battle, and Gwyndor, son of Gwyllin, was wounded to the death. But Túrin came to his aid, and all fled before him, and he bore Gwyndor out of the rout, and escaping into a wood, there laid him on the grass. Then Gwyndor said to Túrin,
"Let bearing pay for bearing, but ill-fated was mine, and vain is thine, for my body is marred beyond healing, and I must leave Middle-earth. And though I love thee, son of Húrin, yet I rue the day that I took thee from the orcs. But for thy prowess and thy pride, still I should have love and life, and Nargothrond should yet stand a while. Now, if thou love me, leave me. Haste thee to Nargothrond, and save Finduilas. And this last I say to thee, she alone stands between thee and thy doom. If thou fail her, it shall not fail to find thee. Farewell."
Then Túrin sped back to Nargothrond, mustering such of the rout as he met with on the way, and the leaves fell from the trees in a great wind as they went, for the autumn was passing to a dire winter. But the host of the orcs and Glaurung the dragon were there before him, and they came suddenly, ere those that were left on guard were aware of what had befallen on the field of Tumalad. In that day the bridge over Narok proved an evil, for it was great and mightily made, and could not swiftly be destroyed. And the enemy came readily over the deep river, and Glaurung came in full fire against the doors of Filegund, and overthrew them, and passed within. And even as Túrin came up, the dreadful sack of Nargothrond was well nigh achieved. The orcs had slain or driven off all that remained in arms, and were even then ransacking the great halls and chambers, plundering and destroying. But those of the women and maidens that were not burned or slain, They had heard it on the terraces before the doors, as slaves to be taken into Morgoth's thraldom. Upon this ruin and woe Túrin came, and none could withstand him, or would not, though he struck down all before him, and passed over the bridge and hewed his way towards the captives. And now he stood alone, for the few that followed him had fled. But in that moment Glaurung issued from the gaping doors and lay behind, between Túrin and the bridge. Then suddenly he spoke by the evil spirit that was in him, saying,
"Hail, son of Húrin, well met."
Then Túrin sprang about and strode against him, and the edges of Gurthang shone as white flame, but Glaurung withheld his blast, and opened wide his serpent eyes, and gazed upon Túrin. Without fear, Túrin looked into them as he raised up the sword, and straightway he fell under the binding spell of the lidless eyes of the dragon, and was halted moveless. Then, for a long time, he stood as one graven of stone, and they two were alone, silent before the doors of Nargothrond. But Glaurung spoke again, taunting Túrin, and he said,
"Evil have been all thy ways, son of Húrin, thankless fosterling, outlaw, slayer of thy friend, thief of love, usurper of Nargothrond, captain foolhardy, and deserter of thy kin. As thralls thy mother and thy sister live in Dorlamin, in misery and want. Thou art arrayed as a prince, but they go in rags, and for thee they yearn, but thou carest not for that. Glad may thy father be to learn that he hath such a son, as learn he shall."
And Túrin, being under the spell of Glaurung, hearkened to his words, and he saw himself as in a mirror, misshapen by malice, and loathed that which he saw. And while he was yet held by the eyes of the dragon in torment of mind, he could not stir. The orcs drove away the herded captives, and they passed nigh to Túrin and crossed over the bridge. Among them was Finduilas, and she cried out to Túrin as she went, but not until her cries and the wailing of the captives was lost upon the northward road did Glaurung release Túrin, and he might not stop his ears against that voice that haunted him after. Then suddenly Glaurung withdrew his glance and waited, and Túrin stirred slowly, as one waking from a hideous dream. Then, coming to himself, he sprang upon the dragon with a cry.
But Glaurung laughed, saying,
If thou wilt be slain, I will slay thee gladly. But small help will that be to Morwen and Nienor. No heed didst thou give to the cries of the elf woman. Wilt thou deny also the bond of thy blood?
But Túrin, drawing back his sword, stabbed at the dragon's eyes, and Glaurung, coiling back swiftly, towered above him, and said,
Nay, at least thou art valiant beyond all whom I have met, and they lie who say that we of our part do not honor the valor of foes. See now, I offer thee freedom. Go to thy kin, if thou canst. Get thee gone. And if elf or man be left to make tale of these days, then surely in scorn they will name thee, if thou spurnest this gift.
Then Túrin, being yet bemused by the eyes of the dragon, as were he treating with a foe that could no pity, believed the words of Glaurung, and turning away he sped over the bridge. But as he went, Glaurung spoke behind him, saying in a fell voice,
Haste thee now, son of Húrin, to Dorlamin, or perhaps the orcs shall come before thee once again. And if thou tarry for Finduilas, then never shalt thou see Morwen again, and never at all shalt thou see Nienor, thy sister, and they will curse thee.
But Túrin passed away on the northward road, and Glaurung laughed once more, for he had accomplished the errand of his master. Then he turned to his own pleasure, and sent forth his blast, and burned all about him. But all the orcs that were busy in the sack he routed forth, and drove them away, and denied them their plunder, even to the last thing of worth. The bridge then he broke down, and cast into the foam of Narok, and being thus secure, he gathered all the hoard and riches of Filagund, and heaped them, and lay upon them in the innermost hall, and rested a while. And Túrin hastened along the ways to the north, through the lands now desolate, between Narok and Taiglin, and the fell winter came down to meet him. For in that year snow fell ere autumn was past, and spring came late and cold. Ever it seemed to him as he went that he heard the cries of Finduilas, calling his name by wood and hill, and great was his anguish. But his heart being hot with the lies of Glaurung, and seeing ever in his mind the orcs burning the house of Húrin, or putting Morwen and Nienor to torment, he held on his way, and turned never aside. At last, worn by haste and the long road, for 40 for she had fled with Nienor out of Dorlomin. None but Eirin knew where. Then Túrin strode to Brada's table, and seizing him, he drew his sword and demanded that he be told whither Morwen had gone, and Eirin declared to him that she went to Doriath to seek her son. For the lands were freed then from evil, she said, by the black sword of the south, who now has fallen, they say. Then Túrin's eyes were opened, and the last threads of Glaurung's spell were loosed, and for anguish and wrath at the lies that had deluded him, and hatred of the oppressors of Morwen, a black rage seized him, and he slew Brada in his hall and other Easterlings that were his guests. Thereafter he fled out into the winter, a hunted man, but he was aided by some that remained of Hador's people and knew the ways of the wild, and with them he escaped through the falling snow and came to an outlaw's refuge in the southern mountains of Dorlomin. Thence Túrin passed again from the land of his childhood and returned to Sirion's vale. His heart was bitter, for to Dorlomin he had brought only greater woe upon the remnant of his people, and they were glad of his going. And this comfort alone, he said, that by the prowess of the black sword the ways to Doria had been laid open to Morwen. And he said in his thought, then those deeds wrought not evil to all, and where else might I have better bestowed my kin, even had I come sooner? For if the girdle of Melian be broken, then last hope is ended. Nay, it is better indeed as things be, for a shadow I cast wheresoever I come. Let Melian keep them, and I will leave them in peace, unshadowed for a while. Now, Túrin, coming down from Eredwethrin, sought for Finduilas in vain, roaming the woods beneath the mountains, wild and wary as a beast, and he waylaid all the roads that went north to the pass of Sirion. But he was too late, for all the trails had grown old or were washed away by the winter. Yet thus it was that passing southwards down Teiglin, Túrin came upon some of the men of Brethiel that were surrounded by orcs, and he delivered them, for the orcs fled from Gurthang. He named himself Wild Man of the Woods, and they besought him to come and dwell with them, but he said that he had an errand yet unachieved, to seek Finduilas, Orodreth's daughter of Nargothrond. Then Dorlas, the leader of those woodmen, told the grievous tidings of her death. For the men of Brethiel had waylaid at the crossings of Teiglin the orc host that led the captives of Nargothrond, hoping to rescue them. But the orcs had at once cruelly slain their prisoners, and Finduilas they pinned to a tree with a spear. So she died, saying at the last, "Tell the Mormegil that Finduilas is here." Therefore they had laid her in a mound near that place, and named it Haud en Eleth, the Mount of the Elf-maid. Túrin bade them lead him thither, and there he fell down into a darkness of grief that was near death. Then Dorlas, by his black sword, the fame whereof had come even into the deeps of Brethiel, and by his quest of the king's daughter, knew that this wild man was indeed the Mormegil of Nargothrond, whom rumour said was the son of Húrin of Dorlomin. Therefore the woodmen lifted him up and bore him away to their homes. Now those were set in a stockade upon a high place in the forest, Efel Brandir upon Amon Obel. For the people of Haleth were now dwindled by war, and Brandir, son of Handir, who ruled them, was a man of gentle mood, and lame also from childhood, and he trusted rather in secrecy than in deeds of war to save them from the power of the north. Therefore he feared the tidings that Dorlas brought, and when he beheld the face of Túrin as he lay on the bier, a cloud of foreboding lay on his heart. Nonetheless, being moved by his woe, he took him into his own house and tended him, for he had skill in healing. And with the beginning of spring, Túrin cast off his darkness and grew hale again, and he arose, and he thought that he would remain in Brethiel hidden, and put his shadow behind him, forsaking the past. He took therefore a new name, Turambar, which in the high elven speech signified Master of Doom, and he besought the woodmen to forget that he was a stranger among them, or ever bore any other name. Nonetheless, he would not wholly leave deeds of war, for he could not endure that the orcs should come to the crossings of Teiglin, or draw nigh to Haud en Eleth. And he made that a place of dread for them, so that they shunned it. But he laid his black sword by, and wielded rather a bow and the spear.